As I stated in my last episode, I want to get every DC film off my plate before heading over to Marvel films. I'll be doing all the other heroes that have got a DC film that are not attributed to the core 7 members of the Justice League. This will include all theatrically released DC films, DC serials, cancelled films, and upcoming films. I'll also make quick mention of the Vertigo adaptations, but won't get into the Paradox Press or Wildstorm adaptations. Let's begin. Let's get the serials out of the way first. Technically, the first ever DC film serial is The Adventures of Captain Marvel in 1941, even though at the time he was a Fawcett Comics character. Captain Marvel is portrayed by Tom Tyler and Billy Batson is portrayed by Frank Coughlin Jr. It's an origin story that isn't a specific adaptation of anything from the comics, as well as changing the origin of Captain Marvel. The villain is one made for the film called The Scorpion. Next serial is another Fawcett Comics character turned DC Comics character called Spy Smasher in 1942. Here, the title hero is played by Kane Richmond. It's apparently more like the original comic, with using more characters from said comic, like Admiral Corby and his daughter Eve, and the villain, The Mask. Film historians have stated that the stunts and action were some of the best ever portrayed in the 40s Hollywood era. Kind of interesting. Next is Hop Harrigan in 1946, and he was a character from All American Publications and in the anthology comic of the same name, which was also the home of Golden Age heroes like Green Lantern, Atom, Red Tornado, Dr. Midnight, and Sargon the Sorcerer. This was later bought out by DC, which was National Periodicals at the time. It's based on a pretty unknown hero, as he was only known for his aviation skills and had adventures revolving around such. He unfortunately faded into obscurity, just like this serial. William Bakewell plays Hop Harrigan, and Sumner Getchell plays his sidekick Tank. The villain is called the Chief Pilot, played by Wheeler Oakman. I kinda urge you to read more into this character so that more people could know about this somewhat forgotten character. Next up is The Vigilante, and not the Adrian Chase version, but the original Greg Saunders version, originally Sanders. The Vigilante is played by Ralph Bird, and his sidekick Stuff, who in the comics was Chinese, is played by George Offerman Jr. The villain is a guy called X1, as well as his gang, and I couldn't find out who he was played by, so I assume he is never seen throughout the serial. The next is Congo Bill in 1948. In the serial, he is a hunter and animal trainer. He is played by Don McGuire, and the villain, the White Queen, is played by Cleo Moore. The final DC serial is Blackhawk in 1952, who at the time was a Quality Comics character. He's portrayed by Kirk Allen, who portrayed Superman in both film serials, and the villain is played by Carol Foreman, who played Spider Lady in the first Superman serial. The serial was made after the prime decade of the 1940s, and the film serial would officially be retired 3 years later in 1955. Now onto officially made films, the first of which being Swamp Thing in 1982. This was directed by famed horror director Wes Craven and stars Ray Wise as Alec Holland and Dick Durock as Swamp Thing. It also features Adrienne Barbeau as the love interest Alice Cable and Louis Jordan as the villain Anton Arcane. It's not exactly like the original comic book hero, but it does try its hardest despite some idiotic moments and effects. The next is the horrendously awful Supergirl in 1984. Despite having some A-list talent like Faye Dunaway, Mia Farrow, and Peter O'Toole, it's a terribly written film and pretty sexist. Helen Slater plays Supergirl, and surprise, surprise, she's awful. Faye Dunaway is the villain Selena, and she tries her best with a terrible script. Next up is the sequel to Swamp Thing called Return of Swamp Thing, and it goes for more of a comedic route. Dick Durock returns once again as Swamp Thing, and Heather Locklear plays the love interest Abigail Arcane. Louis Jordan returns once again as the villain Anton Arcane. This was followed up a year later with the TV series in 1990, although despite Durock returning to the role once again, it's unsure whether this takes place in the same universe as the two films or is in a new universe, but I assume the latter. Next up is Steel. Originally intended to be a spin-off to the Superman Lives movie that never happened, this was fast-tracked and made instead. It has Shaquille O'Neal as Steel and Judd Nelson as the villain Nathaniel Burke. The movie ditches what makes the comic book character really interesting and is really stupid as a result. Speaking of stupid, Catwoman in 2004. This has an interesting history to it, which I'll explain later. Halle Berry is an original Catwoman made purely for the film, Patience Phillips, and not Selena Kyle. She follows the similarly meek personality before her transformation into Catwoman, similar to the Batman Returns portrayal. Sharon Stone plays the villain Laurel Hadair. This is widely considered to be not only one of the worst comic book films of all time, but one of the worst films of all time. So, moving on. On to Watchmen. Thank God, a good movie. Adapted from the graphic novel of the same name, this stars Jeffrey Dean Morgan as the comedian, Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach, Billy Crudup as Dr. Manhattan, Malin Ackerman as Silk Spectre 2, Patrick Wilson as Night Owl 2, and Matthew Good as Ozymandias. Each version of this film is good in its own right, but in terms of a great film that isn't too overstuffed, I recommend the director's cut. Final alternate DC film is the DCEU film Suicide Squad. It features Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn, Will Smith as Deadshot, Jai Courtney as Captain Boomerang, Joel Kinnaman as Rick Flag, Karen Fukuhara as Katana, Jay Hernandez as El Diablo, and I know I'm going to butcher this name and I apologize in advance, Adewale Akinwumi Agbaje as Killer Croc. The villain is Enchantress, played by Cara Delevingne. Jared Leto plays the Joker, and Viola Davis plays Amanda Waller. Not a horrendous film by any means, just painfully mediocre. I'd also like to give a quick mention to movies like Constantine, V for Vendetta, The Losers, and Jonah Hex. I did originally say I wasn't going to talk about these, but before starting this video, I decided to mention it in the opening due to the fact that Vertigo is pretty tight-knit with the DC universe, unlike the stuff from Paradox Press and Wildstorm. So, quick mentions. However, I will be talking about a cancelled film from the Vertigo imprint once I get to that. Next up is upcoming flicks, and there are plenty of them thanks to the DCEU. First of which is Shazam. This is set to release April 5th of next year. They just got done filming and released the first poster. David F. Sandberg is directing, and in the starring roles are Asher Angel as Billy Batson and Zachary Levi as Captain Marvel. Mark Strong, previously Sinestro in Green Lantern, is playing the villain, Dr. Sivana. It will also apparently feature the New 52 version of the Marvel family, but Sandberg also stated that the Billy Batson in this film will be more akin to the Golden Age version. Justice League Dark is up next, and this one is a bit shaky. This was planned even before Man of Steel was released with Guillermo del Toro directing. Then when the DCEU was in development, del Toro stated that he would hope that it would be part of this universe. However, in 2015, del Toro left the project and Doug Liman replaced him with Michael Gillio writing the film. Then Liman left to focus on his film Chaos Walking, and we haven't gotten a director since then. However, at San Diego Comic-Con last year, it was stated that it was still in development and would be released in 2020. Cyborg is up next, and there has been no news regarding it with the exception that it will also be released in 2020 and that Ray Fisher is reprising his role. While he is technically part of the Justice League in this universe, I prefer Martian Manhunter, so he was mentioned here. It was also stated that he'll be in the Flash solo film, whether it is Flashpoint or not. The rest of these films do not have set release dates, so be wary of that. Next is Lobo, which has been in production since 2009 with originally Guy Ritchie directing. He stated that it will be similar in tone to his previous films like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, even though the studio wanted a PG-13 rating. This fell through as Ritchie wanted to work on Sherlock Holmes' Game of Shadows instead, and in 2012 it was stated that Brad Peyton would be directing and writing with Dwayne Johnson portraying Lobo. However, Johnson chose to portray Black Adam instead. Then recently, Jason Fuchs stated he would be writing the script and Michael Bay was in talks to direct. It kinda makes sense with Bay directing since Lobo is a parody of 80s/90s action heroes, and Bay is a dude bro stuck in 1996, so everything works if he's chosen. Plus, he has directed great action films in the past. Next is Booster Gold and Blue Beetle. It was announced that Zack Stentz would be writing the script with Greg Berlanti producing and possibly directing. He also stated that this was not to connect to the overall DCEU for unknown reasons. It was originally set to be a TV project for Sci-Fi in late 2011 and with Andrew Kreisberg, but nothing ever came of it. We haven't gotten any info since late 2016, so it's unsure if this will be made or not, as well as the fact that there hasn't been any news regarding Blue Beetle being in the film with the exception of rumors. However, recently there's a rumor going around that a new character in the TV show Arrow is actually going to be Blue Beetle since this film hasn't been made yet, and originally Brandon Routh's character Ray Palmer was going to be Blue Beetle, but they couldn't use him because of this movie. But the fact that this hasn't been, made yet, it might be okay now. So be wary of that. But as far as the movie goes, nothing yet. Suicide Squad 2 is up next, and there isn't a ton of info, but Gavin O'Connor is going to direct and write the film, and Jared Leto stated he's going to reprise his role as the Joker. Several cast members stated that they wanted to return, like Fukuhara, Courtney, and Smith. However, nothing is known about the villain story, who's returning, or new characters. In terms of Suicide Squad members, though, Will Smith's Deadshot is going to get a solo film, but with no info regarding it. Gotham City Sirens is to be written and directed by David Ayer and have Margot Robbie return as Harley Quinn, along with Catwoman and Poison Ivy, who haven't been cast yet. Then there's the Joker slash Harley Quinn film with Glenn Ficarra and John Requa, hope I'm pronouncing those right, co-writing and co-directing with Robbie and Leto starring. Then there was initially the Harley Quinn solo movie as well, and will be written by Christina Hodson. However, this has been morphed into a Birds of Prey film with Kathy Yan directing. Alright, almost done with all these fucking announced films where the majority probably won't happen. Nightwing, to be directed by Chris McKay and Bill Dubuque writing. No one has been cast yet. Batgirl initially had Joss Whedon attached to direct, but was booted due to his work on Justice League, but Christina Hodson will also write this film along with Birds of Prey. Again, no one has been cast. Deathstroke will also be getting a solo film with The Raid and The Raid 2 director Gareth Evans, who is also going to be writing. He was originally slated to appear in The Batman, but after Affleck stepped down from directing and writing, Matt Reeves threw out his script and started fresh and new. Joe Manganiello was initially cast when Affleck was on board, so people were unsure whether he would reprise his role, but a Justice League post-credits scene confirmed that Manganiello will be playing the character. The upcoming ambitious New Gods film has Selma director Ava DuVernay helming the project with writing and directorial duties. No cast yet, but she stated it will be very big and very epic, and will be the quote-unquote best DC film. Well, since Wrinkle in Time bombed harder than Pearl fucking Harbor, I'm not too sure about that. Next is World War II hero Blackhawk, to be directed and produced by Steven Spielberg and written by David Coep. And allegedly, he tried to get this film off the ground for years, but couldn't until now. No info outside of that. Moving on to the final upcoming film is the Joker standalone film with Martin Scorsese producing and Todd Phillips directing, writing, and producing. Leonardo DiCaprio was reported to be in talks for the role, but apparently Joaquin Phoenix will be playing the Joker in this film. It'll be an origin film that will take place in the 80s akin to The Killing Joke, but it is unsure whether or not it will take inspiration from that. Due to the fact that this is going to be a Joker origin film, completely going against what makes the character great, and will be directed by the asshole who gave us the Hangover trilogy, I don't have high hopes for this one. And this will also not take place in the DCEU. Apparently DC is starting like an Elseworld movie subdivision kind of thing, and this will be the first one if this actually gets made. However, anything is better than Jared Leto at this point, so maybe there's the possibility it could be good. Probably not. Now that that's all done and over with, we can move on to canceled films, the fun stuff. First off is Tim Burton's Catwoman spin-off to Batman Returns. After WB was upset with Returns after the diminishing box office returns and mixed reception, they headed into a lighter direction with Batman Forever and Burton only getting a producing credit. Despite this, Burton wanted the story of Catwoman to continue in her own spin-off film after it was revealed she lived at the end of Returns. Daniel Waters was attached to write the screenplay with Burton directing once again. Waters wrote the script in tune with its predecessor as very dark and brooding. Michelle Pfeiffer was very much interested in reprising her role in the film. The plot would have involved Selina Kyle having amnesia after the events of Batman Returns, and her heading to a place called Oasisburg, which is akin to something like Las Vegas or Palm Springs. It's a resort in the middle of the desert, and it is run by superheroes. It would have involved making fun of the male superhero mythos, and eventually she becomes Catwoman once again, realizing that deep down that the heroes aren't good. It sounds kind of interesting, but it probably wouldn't have worked. The script was submitted on the same day Batman Forever premiered, which later became the top grossing film of that year, so that was the end of that. It was in development hell for years, and at one point Ashley Judd was up for the role, as well as Nicole Kidman. However, it later morphed into the shitstorm that is Catwoman 2004 with Halle Berry. Next up, in the early to mid 90s, WB was interested in making a Plastic Man movie. Before The Matrix, and a little bit before Bound came out, the Wachowskis were eventually chosen to write the film, while Steven Spielberg was interested to direct the project, but nothing ever came of it. Brian Spicer was eventually chosen to direct. However, pre-production eventually stopped mainly due to nobody wanting to go ahead with a character that was too obscure for mainstream audiences. There wasn't any casting either. The script is a basic action comedy and for some reason changed Plastic Man's real name from Patrick to Daniel. It was pretty much about O'Brien being not only an ex-con but an environmentalist as well. He must battle against a made-for-film villain, Icarus Argon, who had been in various accidents that caused his skin to become saggy. This was due to experiments done by Dr. Susan Bright, an old flame from Daniel's past, and Argon forces her to bring his body back to peak form. At around the same time, Daniel breaks into Argon's factory with plans to release experimented on animals but gets captured and is used as a guinea pig. This turns him into Plastic Man, and he must battle against Argon, save Susan, and save the city from toxins that will wipe the city out due to Argon's experiments. Over the course of the script, O'Brien becomes a wanted man, and Argon eventually becomes a Plastic Man himself, as well as O'Brien becoming a full-fledged superhero too. He eventually saves the day and Susan and starts a relationship with her. It has a lot of hit and miss comedy and a confusing and dumb plot that is next to nothing like the original character. As I said, this was eventually shit-canned due to Plastic Man's obscurity, until 2008 where WB was interested in the project once again, and they wanted Keanu Reeves for the role while Jim Carrey and Bruce Campbell were considered. This never became anything once again until 2013 where it was David Tennant who was in talks for the role. But again, nothing ever came of it. In 2006, it was announced that a nobody writer named Adam Turner was penning a script for a Doom Patrol film. Nothing ever came of it. Then in 2007, it was announced that a Teen Titans movie was going to happen with Akiva Goldsman and Mark Verheiden writing. Robin was confirmed, but that was it. Then it was announced that a Swamp Thing reboot was happening and it was to be directed and produced by Joel Silver with Akiva Goldsman writing. Once again, nothing ever came of it. Seems to be a pattern. However, it's safe to assume that all three of these were morphed into TV series, as all three of these projects were announced as part of the new DC streaming service coming out next year. So while these were cancelled, they are now becoming something hopefully better. One of the more interesting films to be cancelled is Green Arrow Escape from Supermax. Apparently, DC saw how Iron Man fared at the box office and wanted to make a cinematic universe of their own. While yes, this does clash with my statements in the Justice League episode with Justice League Mortal, I imagine it that WB didn't want to do a Justice League film slash team up film and wanted to focus on smaller heroes. With the planned Green Arrow film, it was exactly that. A small movie with a C-list hero that can slowly build up to the bigger universe, similar with Marvel and Iron Man. While I did say that WB didn't want big universes, I just assumed the source I got meant that they didn't want such a huge film as a starting point is all. To me, that would have been more interesting, but whatever. On to Green Arrow. In 2008, David S. Goyer was chosen to produce, and Justin Marks was eventually chosen to write a screenplay for Green Arrow. Entitled Green Arrow Escape from Supermax, the execs absolutely loved the script. It actually wasn't an origin story for the character, which is a bit risky for such a smaller character, as well as the fact that it featured cameos of smaller villains like Icicle and the Pied Piper, and bigger villains like Lex Luthor. The beginning of the script actually has Green Arrow getting framed for a crime he didn't commit and is sentenced to a maximum security prison designed for supervillains due to Green Arrow being a talented escape artist. With that, a lot of the villains in said prison are here because of Green Arrow. With GA being sentenced here, the rest of the film involves GA trying to survive his life in prison. The name Parallax is name dropped as a special device that is inputted into each prisoner so if they get in trouble, their body can be rendered useless with a push of a button, as well as the fact that Amanda Waller is the head of the prison and explains this to GA. In an interview with Justin Marks, he explained that the Supermax prison is like a character itself trying to contain different types of villains with different types of powers. There are also three different classes of prisoners: mortals, geniuses who are doped up on a drug that keeps them dumb, i.e. Lex Luthor, and metahumans. In the script, GA befriends Hartley Rathaway, aka the Pied Piper. GA and Harley try to find a way to escape with the help of some other metahumans. It goes into detail about Green Arrow and his history with these criminals, as well as how Green Arrow starts to see that not all of these villains are pure evil. Eventually, Green Arrow escapes and outs the prison as abusive to its prisoners and gets the prison shut down. The script ends with GA doubting his actions in the past and what kind of hero he is. This script wasn't picked up though, as the studio claimed that a movie revolving around villains wouldn't work and how the stakes aren't very high, like most other superhero films. The execs liked it, but the higher ups weren't having it. Since Batman and Superman movies were still making a shit ton of money at the time, WB didn't want to invest in a smaller movie like this with a C-list character like Green Arrow, as well as the fact that Iron Man and most likely Incredible Hulk as well were the only MCU films out at the time, not more obscure characters like Ant-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, or Black Panther. Escape from Supermax was eventually shelved with the idea of villains being the heroes retooled into Suicide Squad. No other crew nor any cast member signed on before this unfortunately faded away. In 2010, it was revealed that Warner Brothers wanted to make a Starman film, and it would be produced by Dan Lin and Gregory Novak. It got no farther than that. Then there was an attempted Hawkman movie in 2011 as well. The only news we got was that WB was looking for writers to pen the script. It was set to be an origin story for the Golden Age Carter Hall version of Hawkman. Now, the next thing is the Sergeant Rock film. It was in development since the late 80s and early 90s, with Arnold Schwarzenegger in talks for the role despite him being Austrian. Various screenplays were written by David Peoples, Steven D'Souza, John Milius, and Brian Helgeland, but it didn't get farther than that. However, Joel Silver was still trying to get the movie off the ground in the early 2000s with a new script, and Arnie not in the leading role. He got John Cox to write the script, which was not based on the drafts by Peoples, D'Souza, Milius, or Helgeland. Bruce Willis was in talks to star and Guy Ritchie to direct. However, due to Ritchie wanting to work on the Sherlock Holmes film, he dropped out but confirmed that it would take place in World War II and feature the members of Easy Company. However, Silver stated that it would take place in the future a couple years after Ritchie made these statements. It hasn't gotten any farther than that, though. The future of this project is uncertain. In 2007, it was announced that a Why the Last Man film was in development. While I am aware that this is a Vertigo film, it does have a rich history behind it, and plus I mentioned it earlier in the video. New Line Cinemas secured the rights in 2007 with DJ Caruso directing, Carl Ellsworth writing, and David S. Goyer as producer. It was set to start filming in 2008 with a release in hopefully 2009. The script was a rewrite of a draft by Jeff Vintar, which closely followed the original story. However, the studio was upset with the script and they didn't fully embrace the story. Brian K. Vaughan, who was the writer of the original comic, wrote another draft which was next to nothing like the original story. The studio still didn't like the script, but Caruso still tried to get the film off the ground. He stated that the story was way too much for one film, but tried to make the best film possible. Caruso stated that the film would adapt the first 14 issues of the original series, as well as the fact that they tried to plan a trilogy to adapt the whole story. Shia LaBeouf was considered for the lead role of Yorick, but stated he didn't want the role, thinking that the character was too similar to his character in the Transformers films, Sam Witwicky. But he stated that there was a chance that he would still be starring. Caruso wanted to use a real monkey for the role of Ampersand and not use CGI, as well as getting Alicia Keys for the role of Agent 355. Zachary Levi was very much interested in the role of Yorick and campaigned for the role. New Line wanted the film to be a standalone film and refused to accept the trilogy Caruso wanted to do. So because of this, Caruso left the project. In 2012, Jericho writers Matthew Federman and Steven Skaya were tapped to write a new script. J.C. Spink, Chris Bender, and David S. Goyer were producing. New Line was actually happy with the script that Fetterman and Skye wrote and were now looking for directors to helm the project. Dan Trachtenberg, director of 10 Cloverfield Lane, was chosen in early 2013. In June of that year, Goyer stated that they had a script that was as close as it's ever been, meaning that it would either finally go into production soon or that it was actually close to the original story, but I think the former. However, in 2014 of the next year, Vaughn stated that if they didn't get the movie off the ground soon, the rights would go back to him and Pia Guara. A few months later, Trachtenberg tweeted that the film was dead and the rights went back to them. However, a formal pilot order has been commissioned by FX, and that Michael Green and Ida Mashaka Kroll is to serve as the showrunners, with Melina Matsoukas directing the plot. That's it for DC. No other canceled projects, no other weird standalone movies outside of Justice League. Now we can move on to Marvel with hopefully an episode about Captain America or Hulk.